For over 50 years, Hamer Machine Company has been providing superior quality bag closing machines for all types of industries throughout the world. The Hamer bag closing machine allows each operator to adjust the head and conveyor, choosing the best working height for both. The lock nuts must be adjusted up or down when changing the conveyor height. Never attempt to lower the conveyor without first loosening these nuts, or damage to the conveyor bed will result. The closer boasts a long conveyor bed, which allows efficient operation anywhere. Machine operation. Place the coil of Hamer wire on the wire reel so that the wire will feed off the top in a clockwise direction. A few drops of oil placed on several positions of the coil makes it easier for the wire to uncoil. Raise the wire tension lever to a horizontal position and remove the transport wire from the wire tube. Cut the wire ties and feed the wire through the felt oiler and into the tube. Apply oil to the felt oiler as necessary. Using a needle nose pliers, feed the wire from the tube into the wire guide until the wire is flush with the cutter tube. Timing the feed wheel. Whenever the wire tension lever has been raised, it's possible that the wire feed wheel may move out of time. To adjust, simply release the tension by raising the wire tension lever. Then, turn the feed wheel in a clockwise direction until it stops against the wire feed lock spring. Check that the wire is in the groove of the wire feed idler. Then, lower the wire tension lever. The teeth on the wire feed wheel should be cleaned and all other adjustments checked before the pressure on the wire feed idler is changed. Remove the wire from between the feed wheel and feed idler. Place the wire tension lever in a vertical position. Properly adjusted, the feed wheel will turn freely when the feed idler is rotated. To adjust the feed wheel, turn the nut on the wire tension release bolt in or out to obtain the desired pressure. Before putting power into the machine, we recommend a manual walkthrough of your machine's operation. Using a 3/4-inch wrench, turn the drive shaft counterclockwise several times. This action demonstrates the idling position of the machine. While turning the drive shaft, trip the hand trip lever. This activates the cam operation and simulates a bag passing through your machine. The events as they occur are: first, the pivoted die closes against the rigid die. Second, the packer die moves up the bag channel to a closed position. This holds the bag ready for closing. At this point, additional force is required to feed the wire around the dies to form the closing ring. Still turning the drive shaft, you will bring the cam into contact with the cutter lever. This will cause the pivoted die to cut the wire by sliding across the face of the rigid die. Once again, the drive shaft turns easily. You complete the cycle by turning the drive shaft until the packer die returns to its original position and the pivoted die has opened up. Check that the ring you have formed has fallen free of the die before you put power into the machine. Taking care that you have removed all tools and other loose objects, your machine is now ready to power test. Keeping your hands away from all moving parts, trip the hand trip lever. If the closing ring does not drop free, disconnect power and remove the ring before tripping the machine a second time. Adjust the conveyor to a comfortable working height. Then, with a filled bag on the conveyor, loosen the head adjustment locking nut. Crank the head up or down, leaving 2½ inches of bag above the feed chain. Then tighten the lock nut. Run several test bags. To allow proper operation, make sure the bags are placed at least 15 inches apart. Daily mechanical adjustments. The toggle assembly consists of the left-hand threaded die closing link, right-hand threaded closing link, and the die closing adjusting screw and nut. The toggle maintains the moderate pressure of the wire former and cutter against the cutter tube. To check the toggle adjustment, open and close the pivot die manually by turning the crosslink operations crank. Removing the crosslink pin will allow easier movement. As the pivoted die closes against the rigid die, a definite snap should be heard. If not, lengthen the toggle by loosening the lock nut on the die adjusting screw and slightly turn the screw to the proper adjustment. Retighten the lock nut and recheck your adjustment. If your closing rings are badly deformed, the pivoted die is probably too loose. If it is too tight, the wire will not feed. To change the adjustment, place the wire tension lever in a horizontal position. Manually feed the wire 1/16 of an inch beyond the face of the wire guide and cutter tube. Return the wire tension lever to a vertical position and loosen the die adjustment self-locking nut 1 full turn counterclockwise. Close the pivoted die manually. The wire former and cutter should be resting but not locked against the rigid die. Pull the upper cutter lever towards you until it contacts the pivoted die. Using increased force, the pivoted die and the wire former and cutter should have a slight movement of approximately 1/32 of an inch before they come into contact with the wire. To adjust, turn the self-locking nut until you obtain the desired clearance. The die closing linkage closes the pivoted die against the rigid die. The pivoted die bolt should maintain a slight resistance between the die hinge and the pivoted die. To adjust, insert and hold a 3/16 inch Allen wrench in the pivoted die bolt and turn the pivoted die bolt counterclockwise to slightly increase resistance. Tighten the lock nut before you release the Allen wrench. When the pivoted die bolt is properly set, you should be able to open and close the pivoted die with slight resistance. To check for proper adjustment of the crosslink, first tighten the set screws in the die operating gear, die operating crank, and the crosslink operations crank. Trip the trip lever and slowly turn the drive shaft. As the pivoted die closes, watch the die operating crank to see that it closes tightly against the stop screw. If there is a slight space, the crosslink should be lengthened. To do this, remove the crosslink crank pin and loosen the nut on the crosslink screw. Slide the crosslink free and turn it counterclockwise 1/2 turn. Reassemble the linkage, tighten the lock nuts, and check your results. Repeat these steps until the die operating crank stops against the stop screw. If the wire rings are not shearing completely, the cutter lever may need adjustment. To properly adjust, close the pivoted die against the rigid die. Loosen the lock nuts and turn the slotted screw clockwise 1/2 turn. Relock the nuts. Repeat this procedure until the wire ring falls free or the cutter lever comes into contact with the pivoted die. A minimum of 1/32 of an inch of play is necessary between the cutter lever and the pivoted die. If adjusting the cutter lever does not solve your problem, inspect the cutting edges on the cutter tube and cutter die. If either part is worn or chipped, it must be replaced. To replace the cutter die, remove the 2 screws on top of the pivoted die. Remove the worn part and install a new cutter die. To replace the cutter tube, remove the cutter lever bolt and free the cutter lever. This bolt has left-hand threads. Next, remove the rigid die from the rigid die plate. Loosen the Allen set screw and the die clamp bolt on the rigid die. Remove the cutter tube. Install a new cutter tube, taking great care to properly align the grooves in the cutter tube and rigid die. Tighten the die clamp bolt and replace the block in your machine. When activated, the trip finger allows proper closing of the packer die behind the bag. When the trip finger is turned to its furthest counterclockwise position, it should be aligned with the center of the inside feed chain rivets. To adjust, loosen the 2 square head set screws in the trip shaft crank inside the gear case. Push the second clutch release pawl until it wraps against the stop on the gear case. Hold that position and rotate the trip finger until it is properly positioned. Then tighten the set screw. The trip finger should travel without binding. If you still have deformed rings after performing all of the adjustments suggested up to this point, trip the hand lever and turn the drive shaft counterclockwise until the packer die closes against the rigid die. When increased force is used to form a ring, there should be up to 1/8 inch clearance between the packer arm and packer hinge. The packer arm spring should be compressed to 3 inches. If there is no opening between the packer arm and spring, check your machine for excessive wear. Please feel free to call Hamer Machine Company with any questions you may have. When using any machinery, please observe all proper safety procedures. If you follow proper daily maintenance and lubrication schedules as described in your owner's manual, your Hamer machine will give you years of trouble-free service.